My husband told his mother, "I'm leaving her. I can't live with a woman who earns less than me." I agreed to everything he wanted. A month later his lawyer called him, his voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" he asked. My husband froze. He finally understood what I'd never said. "You need to start looking for a real job, Kelly. I can't keep telling people my wife is just a bookkeeper." Scott stood in our kitchen holding his promotion letter, waving it like evidence in a court case he'd already won. Behind him, through the window, I could see the sunrise hitting the apartment building I'd bought through my LV, the one he didn't know about. My new director salary means we're in a different league now. Harrison's wife just made partner at her firm. Chen's wife runs a medical practice. Mine does other people's taxes. Before we continue, I want to thank you for listening to stories that reveal hidden truths. If you believe that real worth isn't measured by titles but by actual contributions, please consider subscribing. It helps us reach more people who need to hear this. I set down my coffee mug, the one from the accounting conference where I'd given the keynote speech last year. Scott had thought I was attending a weekend workshop for small business bookkeepers. In reality, I'd been presenting my framework for corporate restructuring to 200 CFOs. "Director salary," I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. "That's wonderful. How much is the raise?" 15%, he said, his chest puffing out. "Brings me to 120 base, plus bonuses." He said it like he'd just announced he'd won the Nobel Prize. $120,000. Last month alone, my consulting fee from the Steinberg Industries restructure was double that, but Scott didn't know about Steinberg Industries. He didn't know about any of my Fortune 500 clients. The promotion letter was dated 3 days ago. He'd been carrying it around, waiting for the perfect moment to make his announcement, to draw his line in the sand. I watched him fold it carefully and place it on the counter between us, a barrier made of corporate letterhead and misplaced pride. "We should celebrate," I said, already knowing how this conversation would end. "Giovanni's? Like our anniversary?" His face twisted slightly. "About that. The anniversary dinner." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. "Look at this. Harrison took his wife to the French Laundry last month. Posted the whole thing. That's the kind of place someone in my position should be seen at. Not some neighborhood Italian place where you wear the same dress every year. The black dress. He'd noticed after all. What he hadn't noticed was that I wore it because it was the dress from our first date, a sentimental choice that apparently meant nothing to him now. He also hadn't noticed that I'd paid for our anniversary dinner with my business credit card, just like I'd paid for every special occasion dinner for the past 4 years. "Maybe we could go somewhere nicer next time," I offered, knowing there wouldn't be a next time. The way he was standing, the way his eyes kept sliding away from mine, told me he'd already made his decision. "That's the thing, Kelly." He put his phone down and looked at me directly for the first time. "There's an image I need to maintain now. The other directors, their wives, they're different. They contribute equally. They're partners in success. You're still doing the same bookkeeping work you were doing when we met 7 years ago." I almost laughed. The same work. If only he knew that my little bookkeeping job had evolved into Hamilton Financial Services, a consulting firm with 3 Fortune 500 companies on retainer. If only he knew that while he was struggling to make senior analyst, I was restructuring accounting departments for companies whose CEOs he could only dream of meeting. "Your mother called yesterday," I said, changing the subject slightly. "She's still coming for Sunday lunch?" "Actually, about that." Scott picked up his coffee, the coffee I'd made him with beans from the specialty roaster that cost $30 a pound. "She had some thoughts about us. About our situation." "Our situation?" Patricia Hoffman had been having thoughts about our situation since the day Scott introduced me as a bookkeeper. She'd looked at me the way you'd look at a stain on expensive furniture. Something unfortunate that needed to be dealt with eventually. "She thinks I'm being held back," Scott continued. "That I could be moving faster in my career if I had the right kind of support at home. Someone who understands the corporate world. Someone who can host dinner parties and network with the right people." "I understand the corporate world," I said quietly. "Kelly, you balance books for dentists and dry cleaners. That's not the same as understanding high-level business strategy. Last week, I'd saved a pharmaceutical company $40 million by identifying redundancies in their accounting structure. The week before that, I'd helped a tech startup prepare for an IPO that would value them at $2 billion. But Scott thought I spent my days entering receipts for small businesses. He walked over to the window looking out at the view that my consulting fees had paid for. I'm 35 years old. This promotion is just the beginning. In 5 years I could be VP. In 10 maybe C-suite. But I need the right partner for that journey. And I'm not the right partner because I'm a bookkeeper? Because you lack ambition, Kelly. You're content with mediocrity. You've never pushed yourself to be more. I thought about the 14-hour days I'd pulled last month during the Morrison Industries audit, an audit that had uncovered fraud and saved them from bankruptcy. I thought about the certification courses I'd completed online at night while Scott watched sports, each one adding another specialization to my consulting offerings. I thought about the network of CFOs and controllers who had my personal cell phone number and called me when they needed problems solved that their internal teams couldn't handle. You're right, I said finally. I should probably think about my future. Scott turned from the window, relief visible on his face. He thought I was agreeing with him, that I was accepting his assessment of my worth. I'm glad you understand. This isn't easy for me either, but sometimes we have to make difficult choices for growth. The morning sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across our kitchen. In 2 hours, I had a video call with the Morgan Group about their expansion into European markets. They wanted my input on structuring their accounting departments across multiple countries with different tax laws. The consulting fee for that project alone would be more than Scott's new director salary, but he'd never know that. He'd already decided who I was and what I was worth, and nothing I said would change that valuation in his mind. 3 days after Scott's promotion announcement, I was carrying dirty coffee cups from his home office when I heard Patricia's voice through his laptop speakers. He'd left his video call running while grabbing documents from the printer, assuming I wouldn't pay attention to his mother's weekly check-in. The Thursday morning calls had become routine. Patricia calling from her spotless Connecticut kitchen, Scott updating her on his career victories while I supposedly worked in the other room. Did you tell her yet? Patricia's voice carried that particular tone of anticipation, like someone waiting for gossip at her country club. I stopped in the doorway, holding the cups Scott had left scattered across his desk from late-night work sessions. Through the laptop screen, I could see Patricia leaning forward, her pearl necklace catching the light from her kitchen's bay window. Scott returned to his desk, settling into his ergonomic chair, the one I'd bought him for his birthday when he complained about back pain. I brought up the career incompatibility issue. Laid the groundwork. Groundwork. Patricia's laugh was sharp. Scott, darling, you're a director now. You can't keep dragging dead weight. How much longer are you going to pretend that having a bookkeeper for a wife is acceptable? Dead weight. The phrase hung in the air while I stood frozen, gripping Scott's World's Best Husband mug, the one I'd given him our 3rd anniversary when I still believed the words. I know, Mom. I'm handling it. Scott ran his fingers through his hair, a gesture I recognized from 7 years of watching him struggle with difficult decisions. Harrison Blackwood comes highly recommended. Met with him last week. The lawyer from the billboards? Good choice. Aggressive representation for high earners, right? Exactly. He says with the income disparity, I'm in a strong position. Kelly makes maybe $40,000 a year doing those little bookkeeping jobs. My new salary puts me at 3 times that. The documentation is clear. I watched my knuckles turn white around the ceramic handle. 40,000. That's what he thought Hamilton Financial Services brought in. Last month alone, I'd billed 90,000 to the Morrison Group for restructuring their European operations. You deserve someone equal to your success, Patricia continued. When I think about Harrison's wife, she just made partner at Crawford and Associates. Or that lovely Dr. Kim that Marcus married. These are women who contribute equally, who understand ambition. That's exactly my point, Scott agreed, his voice taking on that performative quality he used in office presentations. I can't show up to corporate events with someone who doesn't understand basic business strategy. Last week's dinner with the executives? Kelly spent 20 minutes talking to the CFO's wife about recipe organization. Recipe organization, Mom. I remembered that conversation differently. Margaret Chin, the CFO's wife, had been discussing her daughter's startup, a meal planning app that needed back-end financial structuring. I'd given her my card, the one for Hamilton Financial Services. She'd called yesterday to set up a consultation. When are you filing? Patricia's question was matter-of-fact, like asking about dinner plans. Soon. I need to organize the assets first. Document everything clearly. The apartment, the investment accounts, the savings. I've been the primary contributor to all of it. Well, of course you have. What has she contributed? Basic bookkeeping while you built a real career. The irony is she thinks she's helping by managing our finances, Scott laughed. She has no idea I've been tracking everything separately. Building my case. I backed away from the door silently, still carrying the cups, my mind processing what I'd just heard like analyzing a balance sheet for irregularities. They'd been planning this. While I was working 16-hour days to finish the Steinberg audit, Scott and his mother had been strategizing my disposal. Later that afternoon while Scott was at his office, the one where he was supposedly a director, I found myself searching for something in our bedroom closet. His gym bag had been shoved behind winter coats, which was odd since he claimed to work out every Tuesday and Thursday. Underneath it, wrapped in a plastic folder from Office Max, were printed pages from law firm websites. Blackwood and Associates featured prominently, with certain phrases highlighted in yellow. Protecting high earners, maximizing asset retention, strategic documentation of financial disparity. Behind the printouts was a handwritten list in Scott's neat printing. 2 columns, his and hers. Under his column, the apartment listed at $800,000. The investment portfolio at $200,000. The BMW. The savings account. Under my column, 2008 Honda Civic valued at $4,000. Personal checking account, estimated at $2,000. Bookkeeping equipment. My laptop. $500. He'd been inventorying our life like a business liquidation, except his calculations were based on a fundamental misunderstanding. The apartment wasn't ours. It belonged to Hamilton Financial Services, the LLC I'd established 2 years before our wedding. The investment portfolio was managed under my financial advisory license. Even the BMW was leased through my company as a business vehicle. Scott's name appeared on things as an authorized user, a courtesy I'd extended that he'd mistaken for ownership. I photographed every page with my phone, then returned everything exactly as I'd found it. The gym bag went back behind the coats at the same angle. The folder maintained its slight bend from being pressed against the wall. Scott would never know I'd seen his battle plans. That evening I made dinner while Scott worked late, or said he was working late. Salmon with asparagus, his favorite. He came home at 9, kissed my forehead absently and praised the meal while scrolling through his phone. I watched him eat food I'd prepared in the kitchen I'd renovated with my consulting bonuses, sitting at the table I'd purchased from a client who was liquidating assets, and I felt like an anthropologist observing a species I'd misidentified for years. Good day? I asked, maintaining the routine. Productive, he said. Very productive. Had a meeting about future transitions. Transitions. Even his vocabulary had shifted to corporate speak, sanitizing the personal into the professional. I wondered if Harrison Blackwood had coached him on that too, how to distance yourself linguistically from the spouse you were about to discard. That night, after Scott had fallen asleep, I sat in the living room with my laptop and pulled up the incorporation documents for Hamilton Financial Services. Page after page of legal structure I'd carefully built before saying I do, never imagining I'd need the protection but understanding that good bookkeepers always maintain clean records and clear boundaries. The apartment purchase agreement showing Hamilton Financial Services as the buyer. The investment account documentation, opened under my LLC's EIN number. Even our joint checking account was technically a business account with Scott listed as an authorized signer, not an owner. I'd spent 7 years letting Scott believe he was the primary breadwinner because it seemed to matter so much to his sense of self. Now I understood that silence had been interpreted as confirmation of his superiority. He'd mistaken my discretion for inability, my quiet competence for lack of ambition. The man sleeping in our bed, my bed really, had built an entire narrative around a financial fiction that was about to become very, very real for him. The next morning I woke at 5:15 a.m. and started what would become my new routine, performing the role of devoted wife while documenting the dissolution of my marriage. I cracked eggs for Scott's breakfast, whisking them exactly how he preferred with a splash of cream and white pepper, while my phone recorded from its position against the coffee maker. The video captured his entrance at 7:45. The way he grabbed his coffee without acknowledgement, scrolling through emails on his phone. Big presentation today? I asked, maintaining the conversational rhythm we'd established over 7 years. He responded, not looking up. The cologne hit me then. Something new, expensive with notes of bergamot and cedar. Tom Ford maybe. Definitely not the Calvin Klein I'd bought him for Christmas. You smell nice. New cologne. His eyes flicked up briefly, a tell I recognized from years of watching him navigate minor deceptions. Harrison recommended it. Said professional image includes all the details. Harrison. Already influencing his grooming choices. I made a mental note while flipping his eggs. The October credit card statement would be interesting. Client dinner tonight, Scott announced, standing to leave. Don't wait up. I checked his synchronized calendar on my phone after he left. The one he'd connected to share our schedules. Tuesday, October 15th showed nothing after 3 p.m. No client names, no restaurant reservations, no conference room bookings. But there was a charge on our joint account from yesterday. Chez Laurent, the French restaurant downtown. Table for two. $180. Business lunch, he'd categorize it later. Except his actual company card statements showed he'd been in back-to-back meetings at the office during lunch. The joint account told other stories too. $5,000 withdrawn last Thursday, labeled Investment Opportunity, Emerging Markets Fund. Except I knew every legitimate fund Scott had ever considered, and none required cash payments to personal accounts. The routing number on the withdrawal matched publicly available information for Blackwood and Associates client trust account. Harrison Blackwood was charging premium rates for dismantling marriages, and Scott was paying him from the account I'd meticulously managed for 7 years. I documented everything in a spreadsheet, color-coded and cross-referenced. The cologne purchases at Nordstrom. The unexplained ATM withdrawals in neighborhoods nowhere near his office. The client entertainment charges at bars when his calendar showed he should have been home. Each entry building a financial narrative of a man preparing his exit while assuming his wife was too simple to notice patterns in numbers. Saturday arrived with our monthly couples dinner, the one social obligation Scott hadn't found an excuse to avoid yet. Marcus and Jennifer Chin hosted this time, their craftsman home warm with cooking smells and the sound of their twin boys arguing about video games upstairs. Marcus worked as a tax attorney, the kind who handled complex corporate structures and actually understood the difference between bookkeeping and financial consulting. Kelly. Jennifer hugged me at the door. Marcus has been raving about that restructuring you did for the Morrison Group. Said it was brilliant. Scott's hand tightened on my lower back, his signal for me to deflect. But I was done deflecting. It was an interesting challenge, I said loud enough for others to hear. $40 million in tax savings through proper structural reorganization. $40 million? David Kim whistled from the living room. That's serious money. Kelly loves her numbers, Scott interjected quickly, steering me inside. Always exaggerating the importance of decimal places. Marcus looked between us, his lawyer instincts clearly activated. Decimal places don't add up to $40 million, Scott. That's strategic financial architecture. The evening progressed with Scott performing damage control, casually mentioning his promotion every 10 minutes while lamenting about carrying the financial burden of our household. When Jennifer asked about vacation plans, he laughed bitterly. Vacation? On one salary? Maybe if I didn't have to cover everything myself. But Kelly's consulting, Marcus started. Her little bookkeeping projects barely cover her car payment, Scott interrupted, taking another sip of wine. His third glass. I'm essentially a single-income household. Marcus's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. He knew exactly what Hamilton Financial Services billed because his firm had referred 2 clients to me last year. But he said nothing, just filed the information away with the precision of someone who understood that sometimes silence gathered more evidence than confrontation. Must be stressful, David offered diplomatically. Financial pressure can strain any marriage. You have no idea, Scott agreed, missing the concerned looks Jennifer and Marcus exchanged. That night, after Scott had fallen asleep, wine always knocked him out by 10 p.m., I sat in our bathroom with my phone and called Sarah in California. My sister answered on the second ring despite the time difference. Kelly? It's nearly midnight there. What's wrong? I need legal advice. Oh honey, what did Scott do? The question made me laugh, bitter and short. It's more about what he's planning to do. And what I've already done. I explained everything. The overheard conversation with Patricia, the lawyer fees, the asset documentation based on false assumptions. Then I told her about Hamilton Financial Services, about the LLC structure, about ownership documents that preceded our marriage by 2 years. Sarah whistled low. You set up asset protection before marriage? That's actually brilliant. I wasn't planning for divorce. I was planning for business liability protection. Doesn't matter why you did it. What matters is legal structure. Is his name on any actual ownership documents? Not authorized user, not signatory, actual ownership. No. I've been careful about that. Then he has no claim. 0. The apartment, the investments. If they're held by your LLC and that predates marriage, he can document income disparity all he wants. Won't matter. What about the fact that I've let him believe he owns half of everything? You've let him believe a lot of things. That's not illegal. Has he ever asked to see ownership documents? Never. He just assumes his name being on accounts means ownership. Sarah's legal mind was fully engaged now. Kelly, he's building a case on a foundation that doesn't exist. When his lawyer discovers the LLC structure, it's going to be like pulling a bottom card from a house of cards. Should I tell him? Absolutely not. Let him document everything. Let him file papers. Let him present his case about income disparity. The more he commits to this narrative, the more spectacular the collapse when reality hits. After ending the call, I stood in our bedroom doorway watching Scott sleep. He'd kicked off the covers, sprawled across the bed like he owned it. Tomorrow he'd wake up and continue his performance of the successful director with the embarrassing wife. He'd meet with Harrison Blackwood and strategize about asset division. He'd text someone about dinner plans that weren't on his calendar. And I'd continue my own performance. The devoted wife who didn't notice the new cologne, the missing money, the contempt barely concealed behind corporate speak. But underneath that performance I was building something else entirely. A comprehensive audit of our marriage's dissolution, documented with the precision of someone who understood that numbers never lie, even when people do. The irony wasn't lost on me. Scott was so focused on documenting our income disparity that he'd never thought to verify who actually owned the life he was trying to claim. 2 weeks passed in careful orchestration. I maintained every routine while Scott grew increasingly confident in his deception, mistaking my consistency for obliviousness. On Wednesday morning, he approached me with the studied casualness of someone who'd practiced their lines during their commute. Kelly, we should talk about our future trajectory. He stood by the kitchen island, coffee mug in hand, using the same tone he'd used to propose a quarterly business review. I think it would be beneficial to meet with a neutral third party to discuss our growing incompatibility issues. Incompatibility issues. He'd workshopped that phrase, I could tell. Probably ran it by Harrison Blackwood to ensure it sounded objective rather than accusatory. A counselor? I asked, though I knew exactly what kind of third party he meant. More of a mediator. Someone who can help us navigate this transition professionally. He set down his mug with deliberate care. I've taken the liberty of arranging someone for tomorrow afternoon. 2 o'clock if that works with your schedule. My schedule. As if he'd ever shown interest in my client meetings or consulting deadlines before. Tomorrow's fine. Should I prepare anything? Just come with an open mind about restructuring our arrangement. Restructuring our arrangement. He couldn't even say divorce without wrapping it in corporate terminology, sanitizing the personal until it sounded like a merger dissolution rather than the end of a marriage. The next afternoon arrived gray and drizzling Seattle weather that seemed choreographed for the occasion. Harrison Blackwood appeared at our door at 1:45 p.m. 15 minutes early, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. His handshake felt like he was handling antique porcelain. Delicate, careful, already treating me as something broken. Mrs. Morrison, he said, though my nameplate by the door clearly read Hamilton. Miss Hamilton, I corrected gently, watching him process this small assertion of identity. Of course. My apologies. His smile was practiced, the kind perfected in mirrors and deployed at mediations. Shall we sit? He moved through our apartment with the confidence of someone who'd already mentally catalogued its value. I noticed him noting the artwork, the furniture, the view from the living room windows, calculating assets while maintaining his sympathetic expression. Scott had arranged our dining room like a conference space, Legal pads positioned at each seat, water glasses filled and positioned with geometric precision. He'd even dimmed the overhead light and turned on the table lamps, creating what he probably thought was a professional atmosphere but actually felt like a funeral home viewing room. "Thank you both for making time for this discussion," Blackwood began, settling into his chair and opening his briefcase with theatrical precision. "As you know, we're here to address the financial realities of your situation." Financial realities. Not emotional realities, not relational realities. They'd already reduced our marriage to a spreadsheet. Scott cleared his throat, pulling out his phone. "I've prepared a presentation to illustrate the core issues." A presentation. He'd made a PowerPoint about our divorce. I watched him connect his phone to the smart TV we'd bought last Christmas. Or rather that I'd bought while he complained about the expense. The first slide appeared, Financial Incompatibility Analysis. Below it, a graph showing 2 lines, his salary trending upward, mine flatlining at what he assumed was $40,000 annually. He'd used our wedding photo as a watermark behind the graph, our smiling faces ghosted behind his fabricated data. "As you can see," Scott began, his presenter voice activated, "the earnings gap has become unsustainable. My career trajectory requires a partner who can contribute equally to our lifestyle objectives." The next slide, Current Asset Allocation Inefficiencies. He'd actually created a pie chart of our supposed contributions, his portion consuming 90% of the circle while mine appeared as a sliver barely visible without squinting. "The disparity creates what economists would call a deadweight loss," he continued, clicking to another slide showing theoretical calculations. "Resources that could be optimized for growth are instead maintaining an inefficient status quo." Deadweight loss. He'd just described our marriage as an economic inefficiency, reduced me to a drain on his theoretical productivity. I took notes on my legal pad, writing deadweight loss in careful letters while Blackwood nodded approvingly at Scott's performance. "The solution is clear." Scott moved to his final slide titled, Proposed Restructuring Terms. "A clean division that acknowledges the primary contributor while ensuring a humane transition for the dependent party." Dependent party. Not wife, not Kelly, not even soon-to-be ex. I'd been abstracted into economic terminology. Blackwood produced a folder from his briefcase, sliding documents across the table with practiced precision. "These papers outline the terms Mr. Morrison has generously proposed. The apartment transfers to him, given his primary financial contribution. The investment portfolio likewise. He's even willing to consider temporary support payments to ease your transition." Support payments. Scott wanted alimony from me, but they'd reframed it as his generosity. I read through each page with the attention I'd give a complex audit, noting every assumption, every miscalculation based on Scott's fictional understanding of our finances. The apartment he claimed owned by Hamilton Financial Services. The investments he demanded managed under my advisory license. Even the car he listed as an asset was leased through my LLC. "This seems comprehensive," I said finally, pulling out my pen. "The Mont Blanc I used for signing consulting contracts worth more than Scott's annual salary." "You're being very understanding," Blackwood observed, his condescension barely concealed. "Many spouses in your position would be emotional." My position. The position of someone about to lose everything, he meant. Except I wasn't in that position at all. I signed each page with deliberate care, the same signature that appeared on restructuring proposals for Fortune 500 companies. Scott watched with barely concealed satisfaction, probably already planning his victory call to Patricia. "I believe that concludes our business," Blackwood announced, gathering the papers with obvious relief. "Mr. Morrison, you should be settled in your new arrangement within 30 days. After they shook hands, a firm congratulatory grip between conspirators, and Blackwood departed, Scott immediately retreated to the bedroom with his phone. I heard his voice through the door, excited and slightly manic. "Mom, it's done." He signed everything. No resistance at all. Exactly like you predicted, completely passive. "We can start planning the renovations next week." "Yes, the entire apartment will need updating. Her basic taste is everywhere. The kitchen especially, so dated." Patricia's laughter carried through the door, sharp and delighted. They were already erasing me from the space, planning to paint over my presence like I was an unfortunate color choice. I stood in the hallway listening to them celebrate my supposed defeat, holding the copies Blackwood had left for my records. Predictably passive, they'd said. Basic taste. Dated choices. They were so busy congratulating themselves on their victory that they'd never wondered why someone who managed complex financial restructuring would sign such obviously unfavorable terms without question. Never considered that cooperation might be strategy, not surrender. I filed the papers carefully in my office, placing them next to the LLC documentation, the property trust papers, and 7 years of financial records that told an entirely different story than the PowerPoint presentation still glowing on our television screen. The real presentation would come later, delivered not in slides and charts but in legal reality that would shatter every assumption they'd made. For now, I returned to the kitchen and began preparing dinner, maintaining the routine of a defeated wife while Scott and Patricia planned renovations for an apartment that had never belonged to him. The salmon I'd prepared sat untouched on Scott's plate as he scrolled through his phone, occasionally grunting responses to my attempts at conversation. I cleared the dishes quietly, maintaining the routine of a defeated wife, while mentally preparing for coffee with Marcus Chin the next morning. Marcus had texted me privately after the dinner party, suggesting we meet to discuss tax implications of major life changes. We both knew he meant more than taxes. I arrived at the coffee shop on Pine Street 10 minutes early, choosing a corner table away from the morning rush. Marcus walked in precisely at 9, his expression shifting from professional sympathy to curiosity when he saw I wasn't crying or visibly distressed. "Kelly, I'm sorry about what's happening with Scott," he began, settling into his chair with a large Americano. "That dinner last week was uncomfortable to witness. Actually, Marcus, I need professional advice more than sympathy." I pulled out a folder from my bag, the one containing Hamilton Financial Services documentation. "Before I show you this, I need to know our conversation is protected by attorney-client privilege." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You're hiring me?" I slid a check across the table. $1 retainer. "Now we're official." Marcus accepted the check with a growing smile, then opened the folder. I watched his expression transform as he read through the LLC formation documents, the property trust papers, the investment management structures. His coffee sat forgotten as he flipped through 7 years of meticulous documentation. "Kelly, this is..." He paused, reviewing the apartment ownership papers again. "Hamilton Financial Services owns everything. The apartment, the investment portfolio, even the car lease runs through your company. Established 2 years before I married Scott," I confirmed. "Every major asset is protected under the LLC structure." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a low whistle escaping his lips. "And Scott doesn't know?" "He's never asked. Just assumed that having his name on bank accounts meant ownership. He signs whatever I put in front of him without reading." "This is a golden parachute," Marcus said, still studying the documents. "No, it's better than that. This is a fortress disguised as a starter home. When Blackwood discovers this structure, he's going to have a meltdown. Does Scott really think he owns the apartment? He's already planning renovations with his mother." Marcus actually laughed, then caught himself. "Sorry, that's not professional. But Kelly, you realize he has absolutely no claim to any of this? The divorce papers he had you sign are essentially fantasy documents based on assets that don't exist in the legal structure he assumes." My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Boarding now. See you tonight. Brought my war paint." My sister's way of saying she'd packed her legal files and was ready for battle. I showed Marcus the text. "Sarah's flying in from California. She's a contract lawyer, wants to help me organize everything." "Good. You'll need documentation for when this implodes." Marcus handed back the folder. "Can I give you some unofficial advice? Let Scott keep digging this hole. The deeper he goes with his assumptions, the more spectacular the revelation will be." That evening, Sarah arrived looking every inch the California lawyer in her designer suit and perfect makeup, though her eyes showed the concern of a younger sister. She hugged me fiercely at the airport, whispering, "We're going to destroy him," into my ear before pulling back with a professional smile. Back at the apartment, while Scott attended another mysterious client dinner, Sarah and I spread 7 years of financial records across the dining table where Blackwood had presented his fantasy division of assets just yesterday. Sarah had brought her laptop and a portable scanner, determined to digitize everything. "Start from the beginning," she instructed, pulling up a spreadsheet. "Every deposit, Every client payment, everything. We worked through the night, fueled by coffee and righteous anger. The numbers told a story Scott had never bothered to read. My consulting income from last year alone totaled $347,000. Scott's W-2 showed $98,000, not the $120,000 he claimed. The bonuses he bragged about were fiction. Wait, Sarah paused at her laptop screen around 2 a.m. I'm looking at Scott's LinkedIn profile. It says he's Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives. I laughed, exhausted and bitter. He's a mid-level analyst. I have his actual W-2s right here. Sarah turned her laptop toward me. Scott's profile showed a carefully curated fiction of professional success. Senior Director since 2019. Team of 12 direct reports. Key player in multimillion-dollar acquisitions. Even his education was inflated, listing executive programs he'd attended as degrees he'd earned. This is fraud, Sarah said flatly. If his company knew he was misrepresenting his position publicly, he'd be terminated immediately. He believes it, I said, studying his profile photo, that confident smile aimed at a future that didn't exist. He's told the lie so often it's become his truth. Sarah made notes in her legal pad. This explains his desperation to leave you. You're the only witness to his actual reality. Without you, he can fully inhabit this fictional success story. The next morning, while Scott showered, I met with Thomas Brennan, a private investigator Marcus had recommended. Thomas was unremarkable in every way, which he explained was his greatest asset. We met at a diner near the waterfront, away from anywhere Scott might appear. I don't need surveillance, I explained. Just employment verification. Basic background check on his actual position and standing at his company. Thomas nodded, sliding a contract across the table. Standard employment verification runs about 3 days. I'll need his full name, social security number, and employer information. I provided everything, including Scott's inflated LinkedIn profile for comparison. Thomas glanced at it and smirked. Senior Director? At his age. That's ambitious. 3 days later, Thomas called with results that exceeded my worst assumptions. Your husband is on a performance improvement plan, he said without preamble. Has been for 6 months. He's one missed deadline away from termination. His manager described him as struggling to meet basic analyst responsibilities in the documentation I accessed. He told his mother he was being groomed for partner, I said, feeling a strange mix of vindication and pity. He's being groomed for unemployment. My sources indicate they're already interviewing for his replacement. They're just waiting for end of quarter to avoid severance complications. I sat in my home office, staring at Thomas's report. Scott wasn't just lying about our financial dynamic. He was constructing an entirely fictional existence, one where he was successful, prominent, and held back only by his underachieving wife. The reality was he was a failing analyst with an inflated ego, about to lose his job while planning to take assets he didn't understand weren't his. Sarah reviewed the investigator's report that evening, her legal mind already strategizing. When this comes out in court, if it gets that far, his credibility will be completely destroyed. A man who lies about his job title won't be believed about asset ownership. I maintained the performance for exactly 48 hours after signing those papers, each minute calculated and deliberate. Tuesday morning, I woke at my usual time and started Scott's coffee with the same precision I'd applied for 7 years. Medium roast, 1 sugar, splash of oat milk. I ironed his blue shirt, the one he thought made him look executive level, pressing crisp lines into sleeves that would soon have nowhere important to go. When he grabbed his travel mug without acknowledgement, rushing out to his supposedly critical morning meeting, I simply smiled and reminded him about the dry cleaning. Wednesday followed the same pattern. I prepared his breakfast, asked about his projects, listened to him inflate minor tasks into major accomplishments. He talked about strategic initiatives while I nodded, knowing from Thomas's report that his actual assignment involved updating spreadsheets and sitting in meetings where no one asked his opinion. I played the devoted wife so perfectly that Scott grew careless, leaving his laptop open, his phone unlocked, treating me like furniture that happened to cook and clean. Sarah had returned to California but remained on standby, texting me updates as she researched precedents for asset protection in divorce cases. Marcus checked in daily, each message a reminder that I had allies who understood the magnitude of what was coming. The 48 hours weren't just routine. They were a countdown Harrison Blackwood needed to discover what his client had signed away. Thursday morning arrived crisp and bright. I woke at 5:30, started the coffee and began preparing breakfast. Scott's shower started at exactly 7:45, his routine as predictable as a train schedule. I cracked eggs into the pan, watching them sizzle while his phone sat charging on the counter, screen dark and silent. At 7:52 it rang. Harrison Blackwood's name appeared on the screen. I continued cooking, adding white pepper to the eggs exactly how Scott preferred. The phone stopped, then immediately started again. Same name, presumably same panic. By the third call at 7:54, I could imagine Blackwood pacing his office, his assistant watching nervously as the composed lawyer came undone. The fourth call came at 7:56. This time I heard Scott's muffled voice from the bathroom, annoyed at the interruption. The water was still running, but he must have reached for his waterproof phone holder, the one I'd bought him last Christmas so he could take calls during his important morning routine. Even through the closed door and running water, I heard the exact moment Blackwood's words registered. The water shut off abruptly. Scott's voice, which had started with irritated confidence, climbed in pitch. "What do you mean, Hamilton Financial Services?" I added salt to the eggs, stirring them gently to achieve the creamy consistency Scott demanded. Through the door, Blackwood's voice carried with unexpected clarity, his professional composure cracking like ice under pressure. "The apartment isn't in your name, Scott. It's owned by an LLC. Hamilton Financial Services. Established in 2017, 2 years before your marriage. Your wife is the sole member. You're not on any ownership documents." "That's impossible." Scott's voice had gone thin, strained. "My name is on everything. I've seen it on the statements. You're listed as an authorized user on accounts, not an owner. There's a massive difference legally. The investment portfolio, same situation. The car lease runs through the LLC. Scott, you don't own any of the assets you listed." "Nothing." I plated the eggs alongside wheat toast, cut diagonally the way Scott preferred. The coffee was ready, steaming in his favorite mug. Not the world's best husband, one that sat prominently in the dishwasher, visible from every angle of the kitchen. "She tricked me." Scott's voice cracked like an adolescent's. "She knew this whole time?" "The documentation was publicly available. Filed with the state, recorded with the county. Any basic asset search would have revealed it. We should have verified ownership before proceeding. This is catastrophic for your position." The bathroom door burst open with enough force to bounce off the wall. Scott stood there dripping, a towel hastily wrapped around his waist, his phone clutched in one hand. Water pooled around his feet on the hardwood floors I'd had refinished with my year-end bonus from the Morrison Group. His face had gone pale except for 2 spots of red high on his cheeks, like a fever patient or a caught child. I turned from the stove, holding his breakfast plate in one hand and his coffee in the other. My expression remained pleasantly neutral, the same face I'd worn every morning for 7 years. "Breakfast is ready," I said, setting both on the counter. "Your eggs might get cold if you don't eat soon." He stared at me, mouth opening and closing without sound. Behind him, Blackwood's voice continued from the phone, talking about legal ramifications and documentation failures, but Scott wasn't listening anymore. His eyes moved from my face to the world's best husband mug in the dishwasher, to the breakfast I'd prepared with the same care as every other morning, and I watched the exact moment he understood. "You knew," he whispered. "Not a question. A revelation." I picked up my own coffee, the mug from the financial consulting conference where I'd been a keynote speaker, and took a measured sip. "Your phone was ringing quite insistently. Harrison seems upset about something. You should probably call him back." Water dripped from his hair onto his shoulders, each drop marking time like a metronome. He looked smaller somehow standing there in our kitchen. My kitchen, like he'd shrunk in the shower. The confident director who'd delivered PowerPoint presentations about dead weight loss had been replaced by a confused man in a towel, trying to process how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. "The LLC," he started, then stopped, struggling to form the accusation. "Hamilton Financial Services," I confirmed. "Established 2017. All properly documented and filed. You signed acknowledgments every year when I did our taxes. Page 37 of the return, Schedule E, where it lists LLC income. You've signed it 7 times. His phone buzzed. Blackwood calling back. Scott didn't answer, couldn't seem to move, caught between the bathroom he'd exited and the kitchen where his assumptions were dying. Your breakfast is getting cold, I observed, returning to the stove to clean the pan. And you have that 9 o'clock meeting about strategic initiatives. The one where you update spreadsheets while pretending to be a director. Wouldn't want to be late for that. The casual cruelty of accuracy made him flinch. He grabbed his phone, stumbling backward toward the bedroom, leaving wet footprints on floors he'd never owned. I heard him trying to call Blackwood back, his voice high and desperate, asking about options and strategies and ways to fight this. But there was nothing to fight. Just numbers on documents, properly filed and legally binding, telling a story he'd never bothered to read. I cleaned the breakfast dishes methodically while Scott dressed in the bedroom, his movements erratic and panicked based on the thuds and drawer slams echoing through the apartment. When he finally emerged, his shirt was buttoned incorrectly and his hair still damp from the shower that had changed everything. He stood in the doorway of my home office, watching me open my laptop with the desperate attention of someone hoping for a different reality. We need to talk about this, he said, his director voice attempting to reassert itself despite the visible tremor in his hands. Certainly. I pulled up the financial spreadsheet I had been maintaining for 7 years, the one with color-coded categories and subcategories that told the actual story of our marriage. Which part would you like to discuss first? The income analysis? The expense allocation? The asset ownership documentation? The screen filled with rows of data, each cell precisely formatted and formula-linked. Green highlighted my consulting deposits. Blue marked Scott's salary. Red indicated household expenses. The pattern was immediately visible. A sea of green funding nearly everything with small islands of blue barely covering his personal expenses. Let's start with January of last year, I said, scrolling to the appropriate section. Your take-home after taxes was $5,847. Your car payment was $890. Gym membership $175. Credit card minimum payments for your personal cards, $1,200. That business dinner series you insisted was networking? $2,400 that month alone. You actually ran a deficit of $347, which I covered from the Hamilton Financial Services operations account. Scott's face flushed as he watched the numbers scroll by. That's not. My salary is higher than that. Your gross salary, yes. But we're looking at actual take-home versus actual expenses. Should I pull up February? March. The pattern remains consistent. Your income covers approximately 18% of our total household expenses. My consulting fees handle the remaining 82%. He grabbed the doorframe, his knuckles white against the wood. You never told me you made that much. You never asked. You assumed. Every year during tax preparation these numbers were in front of you. Schedule C for Hamilton Financial Services. Schedule E for the rental income from the investment property. Form 8829 for the business use of home. You signed them without reading them. I minimized the spreadsheet and opened LinkedIn in a new tab. His profile appeared, that confident headshot next to his fictional title. Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives. I opened another tab showing the W-2 retrieval from our tax software. This is interesting, I said, placing the windows side by side. Your LinkedIn says Senior Director since 2019. Your W-2 says Analyst 2. Same position code for 4 consecutive years. No promotion, no title change, just cost of living adjustments that barely kept pace with inflation. Everyone enhances their profile, Scott stammered. It's marketing. It's fraud when you use it to obtain credit or misrepresent yourself in legal documents. You submitted this profile to Blackwood as evidence of your earning potential. You signed divorce papers claiming to be the primary breadwinner based on this fiction. My phone rang. Patricia's name appeared on the screen, her contact photo from last Christmas when she'd worn her pearls and practiced her superior expression. I answered and immediately put her on speaker. You conniving little witch. Patricia's voice filled the office, shrill and desperate. You've been planning this all along, haven't you? Hiding money, manipulating my son. Good morning, Patricia, I interrupted calmly. I haven't hidden anything. Every document was filed with the state, recorded with the county, and disclosed in annual tax returns that Scott signed. The fact that neither of you bothered to understand what you were signing doesn't constitute manipulation on my part. This is fraud. We'll sue you for fraud. On what grounds? That I maintain proper business records? That I established an LLC before marriage, which is actually recommended by financial advisors. That Scott signed documents without reading them? Please, Patricia, consult any attorney. They'll tell you the same thing Blackwood already has. Everything was legal and properly documented. Scott reached for my phone, but I pulled it away, maintaining eye contact with him while his mother continued her tirade. He's moving home, isn't he? I asked Patricia directly. You should probably prepare his room. The one with the soccer trophies and participation awards. He'll need somewhere to live in 30 days. 30 days. Scott's voice cracked. What do you mean 30 days? I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the formal eviction notice I'd had Marcus prepare, properly formatted on Hamilton Financial Services letterhead. As the property owner, I'm terminating your month-to-month tenancy. 30 days notice as required by state law. You'll need to vacate by November 15th. He took the paper with shaking hands, reading it twice as if the words might change. You can't evict me. We're married. We're divorced, remember? You filed the papers. Blackwood processed them. The marriage is dissolved, which makes you a tenant in a property owned by my LLC. A tenant without a lease, without any claim to ownership, and now without permission to remain. Patricia's voice had gone quiet on the speaker, reduced to angry breathing and muffled sobs. The woman who had called me dead weight was processing the reality that her successful son was about to become her unemployed roommate. How will I explain this? Scott asked, the question directed at neither of us and both of us simultaneously. Everyone thinks I won the divorce. That I got everything. That's a branding problem, I suggested. Maybe update your LinkedIn profile? Though I'd recommend being more accurate this time. Unemployed analyst seeking housing has a certain honest ring to it. You're enjoying this, he accused, his voice bitter and small. I considered that for a moment, looking at the man who had called me pathetic, who had plotted my disposal with his mother over wine, who had presented PowerPoint slides about my inadequacy. I'm not enjoying it, I said truthfully. I'm simply concluding it. You wanted a divorce based on financial incompatibility. You got one. The incompatibility just wasn't in the direction you assumed. Patricia had found her voice again. We'll fight this. We'll find a way. Patricia, I interrupted, my tone professional and final. Scott has two priorities right now. First, finding a new place to live before his eviction takes effect. Second, updating his resume with accurate information before his termination becomes final. Oh, didn't he mention that? He's been on performance improvement for 6 months. His company is already interviewing replacements. The silence that followed was complete. Patricia's breathing stopped. Scott's hand holding the eviction notice went still. For a moment, the only sound was the morning traffic outside my window and the quiet hum of my laptop displaying 7 years of meticulous documentation. The beautiful thing about numbers, I said, closing my laptop with deliberate finality, is that they never lie. People lie. Profiles lie. Presentations lie. But numbers? Numbers tell the truth if you bother to read them. Scott left my office clutching the eviction notice, Patricia still breathing heavily through the phone speaker before I finally disconnected the call. Within 4 hours he had contacted the first of what would become 3 different law firms, each consultation more desperate than the last. I learned about his legal tour through Marcus, who encountered him at a professional networking event 2 weeks later, where Scott cornered him near the appetizer table. He actually grabbed my arm, Marcus told me over lunch the following day, shaking his head with professional embarrassment. Started demanding I explain how his wife could own property without him knowing. I had to remind him you weren't his wife anymore, per his own filing. Then I told him what every other attorney already had, that signatures on documents constitute legal acknowledgement, whether you read them or not. The second attorney Scott consulted was Amanda Crawford from Crawford & Associates, the same firm where Harrison's wife had just made partner. Amanda later mentioned to me at a financial conference that Scott had arrived with a binder of printed emails and text messages, trying to prove I had deceived him through malicious competence. which she said wasn't actually a legal concept. The third attorney, someone Patricia found through her country club connections, simply refused to take the case after reviewing the documentation. Meanwhile, I began the process of reclaiming my space. The morning after Scott moved his clothes to Patricia's house, a process that involved him making 7 trips with garbage bags while neighbors watched from their windows, I stood in the center of my apartment with paint samples. The walls he had insisted remain professional gray would become warm terracotta in the living room, soft sage in the bedroom, and buttery cream in the kitchen. I hired painters who completed the transformation in 3 days, during which I worked from a coffee shop and felt my shoulders gradually drop from their permanent position near my ears. Scott's former office, where he had conducted his video calls with Patricia and plotted my financial disposal, became a yoga studio. I removed his massive desk, the filing cabinets full of fictional achievements, and the vision board where he had pinned pictures of cars he couldn't afford and houses he would never own. In their place, I installed bamboo flooring, a wall of mirrors, and a sound system for guided meditations. The first time I did morning yoga in that space, sunlight streaming through windows he had kept covered with heavy blinds, I actually laughed out loud at the transformation. Jennifer Chin called the following week, inviting me to a dinner party. "Just the real friends," she said pointedly. "The ones who knew your value before all this drama surfaced." That Saturday, I arrived at her house with a case of wine I discovered in our storage unit. Bottles Scott had been saving for what he called his freedom celebration, expensive vintages he had researched extensively and purchased with my consulting bonuses. We opened a 2015 Bordeaux that evening, toasting with crystal glasses to accurate documentation, while Marcus regaled the group with legally appropriate details about Scott's attempts to find representation. "The best part," Marcus said, swirling his wine, "is that Patricia has been telling everyone at her bridge club that Scott is staying with her temporarily while his new executive apartment is being renovated. Except Linda Patterson's daughter works in HR at Scott's former company. Former because they finally terminated him last Tuesday." Patricia nearly fainted when Linda asked her how the job search was going. I had established my new morning routine by then. Each day at 5:30 a.m., I sat at my kitchen island with coffee in a new mug Jennifer had given me as a divorce gift, white ceramic with "World's Best Accountant" in gold letters. I would review contracts and proposals while watching the sunrise paint the Seattle skyline in shades of pink and gold, colors that seemed brighter now that no one was there to complain about the early morning light disturbing their sleep. My phone rang during one of these morning sessions. Margaret Chin, the CFO's wife I had met at Scott's last corporate dinner, wanted to discuss her daughter's startup. Word had spread through the executive wives network about what had really happened in my divorce, and suddenly everyone wanted the financial consultant who had been hiding in plain sight at their dinner parties. Within a month, I had signed 3 new Fortune 500 clients, each referred by someone who had previously dismissed me as Scott's bookkeeper wife. The expansion happened naturally. I hired an assistant, Melody, a recent graduate with the kind of hungry intelligence that reminded me of myself 7 years ago. Then came David, a junior consultant who specialized in international tax structures. By month 4, I needed a third employee just to manage scheduling and client communications. Hamilton Financial Services moved from my home office to a suite on the 40th floor of the Rainier Tower, with views of the Sound and Mount Rainier on clear days. 6 months after that morning when Blackwood's panicked call had shattered Scott's shower, Marcus mentioned casually that he had run into Scott at a Starbucks near Patricia's neighborhood. Scott was wearing a polo shirt with a corporate logo, the uniform of his new job at a car rental company where he worked as an assistant manager. He had tried to inflate it, naturally, telling Marcus he was exploring opportunities in the transportation sector, but the name tag reading "Scott here to serve you" had undermined his spin. He actually said the divorce was due to financial incompatibility, Marcus reported, barely containing his amusement. Which is technically accurate, just not in the direction he implies. He also mentioned that living with his mother was temporary while he restructured his portfolio, though I'm not sure what portfolio he could be referring to at this point. I smiled at that, sitting in my new office where afternoon light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. The truth was, Scott had been right about one thing: we were financially incompatible. He had believed that earnings determined worth, that visible success mattered more than actual achievement, that a person's value could be measured in titles and salaries. I had believed in documentation, legal structures, and the quiet accumulation of real assets while he accumulated fictional accomplishments. The silence I had maintained throughout our marriage had indeed been strategy, but not the kind Scott had imagined. It wasn't submission or ignorance or inability. It was the patience of someone who knew that truth, properly documented, would eventually speak louder than any performance, any presentation, any carefully crafted narrative built on assumptions and ego. My financial statements now showed what they had always shown, just no longer hidden behind someone else's need to feel superior. Hamilton Financial Services was thriving, my success no longer minimized or dismissed. Every morning I drank coffee from my world's best accountant mug and thought about how Scott had wanted to leave me because I earned less than him. The beautiful irony was that he had never actually been married to someone who earned less than him. He had just been married to someone who understood that the best power is the kind that doesn't need to announce itself until the moment it matters most. If this story of calculated revenge had you gripping your screen, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Kelly handed Scott coffee while Blackwood panicked on the phone, knowing her LC owned everything. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more jaw-dropping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.